In 1950, American grandmothers cooked the same 30 heirloom dinners every family knew. Meatloaf on Monday, pot roast on Sunday, and chicken and dumplings in the middle of the week. These meals fed America for generations. Recipes were passed from grandmother to mother and mother to daughter, like family treasures. Then the chain broke. Daughters stopped learning. Mothers stopped teaching. Today, most of those heirloom dinners are gone forever. Your grandmother remembers every smell, every taste, and every plate. These are 30 forgotten heirloom dinners from the 1950s no one passes down anymore. Pan-fried beef patties with mushroom gravy fed Detroit families every Thursday night in the 1950s. This was an heirloom dinner passed from grandmother to mother for generations. The beef was ground fresh that morning from the butcher. Mothers mixed it with grated onion, ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, and breadcrumbs. They formed thick oval patties by hand. Each patty was pan-fried in butter until brown on both sides. Then came the gravy. Sliced mushrooms went into the same pan. Beef broth was poured over them. Flour got whisked in to thicken everything. The patties went back in the pan. Everything simmered together until the gravy turned rich and dark brown. The meal was served with mashed potatoes and green beans on the side. The whole dinner cost 60 cents and fed a family of 6. Every kid in the neighborhood ate this at least once a week. Their mothers all knew how to make it. Then TV dinners arrived in grocery stores in 1954. Swanson sold frozen Salisbury steak for 39 cents. It was faster and easier. Mothers stopped making patties from scratch. The recipe was never written down. When those mothers died, the heirloom dinner died with them. Nobody makes it anymore. In 1952, moist meatloaf was the most cooked heirloom dinner in America. Every Monday night grandmothers made it the same way their mothers taught them. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, milk, and diced onions. Ketchup on top. Baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour. The secret was using beef with 20% fat. That kept it moist and tender. Lean beef made it dry and crumbly. Grandmothers knew this by heart. They never measured anything. They just knew how much of each ingredient to add by feel. The meatloaf came out perfect every single time. It was served with mashed potatoes and corn. The whole meal cost less than $1 and fed 8 people. Leftovers made sandwiches for school lunches the next day. Cold meatloaf on white bread with mustard. Every kid ate that sandwich. Then, in the 1970s, health warnings said red meat caused heart disease. Families started eating less beef. Mothers made chicken instead. The meatloaf recipe stopped being passed down. Daughters never learned the right beef to breadcrumb ratio. They never learned how to tell when it was done just by looking. The heirloom dinner disappeared. Today, people buy frozen meatloaf from the grocery store. It tastes nothing like Grandma's. Every Sunday after church, baked chicken and rice casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers served to their families. This dish came from their grandmothers who made it during the Great Depression. It used one whole chicken cut into pieces. The chicken was placed in a baking dish with uncooked white rice underneath. A can of cream of mushroom soup was mixed with water and poured over everything. Salt and pepper on top. The dish was covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 2 hours. The rice absorbed all the chicken juices and soup. It came out creamy and tender. The chicken fell off the bone. The whole family ate together at the table after church. This was a Sunday tradition in every household. The meal cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. Mothers made it every single week for 30 years. Then in the 1980s, families stopped going to church together. Sunday dinners stopped happening. Mothers went back to work and had no time to cook. The casserole required 2 hours in the oven. Nobody had that kind of time anymore. Fast food replaced Sunday dinners. The heirloom recipe was forgotten. Daughters never learned how their grandmothers made it. The tradition died. Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video. Stuffed peppers were the heirloom dinner mothers made when bell peppers were in season. Every August and September these appeared on dinner tables across America. Grandmothers taught their daughters how to make them the old-fashioned way. Large bell peppers were cut in half and seeded. The filling was made from ground beef, cooked white rice, tomato sauce, diced onions, and garlic. Everything was mixed together in a big bowl. The pepper halves were stuffed with the mixture. They were placed in a baking dish with a little water at the bottom. More tomato sauce was spooned over the tops. The dish was covered and baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes. The peppers softened, but still held their shape. The filling was hot and savory. Families ate them with a piece of bread to soak up the extra sauce. The whole meal cost 50 cents when peppers were cheap in late summer. Every household made them at least twice a month during pepper season. Then grocery stores started selling bell peppers year-round in the 1990s. Peppers became expensive, $3 each instead of 10 cents. Families stopped making stuffed peppers. The recipes stopped being taught. Young mothers today have never made them. The heirloom dinner is gone. Nobody makes old-fashioned chicken and dumplings anymore, but every grandmother in the 1950s knew how. This heirloom dinner took 3 hours to make from scratch. A whole chicken was boiled in a big pot with water, onions, celery, and carrots. The chicken simmered for 2 hours until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken was removed and shredded by hand. The broth stayed in the pot. Then came the dumplings. Flour, baking powder, salt, and milk were mixed into a thick dough. The dough was rolled flat and cut into strips. The strips were dropped one by one into the boiling broth. They cooked for 15 minutes until puffy and tender. The shredded chicken went back in. Everything simmered together for another 10 minutes. The result was thick, creamy, and filling. The dumplings soaked up the broth like sponges. Families ate this on cold winter nights. The whole meal cost $1 and fed 8 people. Grandmothers made it every week during winter, but making it took too long. 3 hours of standing in the kitchen. Working mothers in the 1980s didn't have that time. They bought canned soup instead. The heirloom recipe died. Nobody learned how to make dumplings from scratch. That knowledge is gone forever. 5 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one fed families for decades. Every single one cost less than $1. Mothers made them without recipes. They learned by watching their mothers. Then watching stopped, teaching stopped, writing stopped. The dinners disappeared. 25 more heirloom dinners remain. Here they are. The Sloppy Joe sandwich fed every American kid in the 1950s and 1960s. This heirloom dinner was created in Iowa around 1930. By 1950, every mother knew how to make it. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions. Ketchup, brown sugar, mustard, and Worcestershire sauce were stirred in. Everything simmered for 20 minutes until thick and saucy. The mixture was scooped onto soft hamburger buns. Mothers served it with potato chips on the side. Kids ate it with their hands. The sauce dripped everywhere. That's why it was called sloppy. Every school cafeteria in America served sloppy joes once a week. Every kid ate them for lunch. The whole meal cost 35 cents per person. Mothers could feed a family of 6 for $2. Then in 1969, Manwich sauce was invented. It came in a can. You just mixed it with ground beef. No measuring, no mixing ingredients. It was faster and easier. Mothers stopped making sloppy joes from scratch. They bought cans of Manwich instead. The homemade recipe was forgotten. Daughters never learned the right ratio of ketchup to brown sugar. They never learned how long to simmer it. The heirloom version died. Today's sloppy joes taste like chemicals. Beef stew with mashed potatoes was the heirloom dinner grandmothers made every Saturday in winter. This meal came from their great-grandmothers who cooked it in the 1800s. Beef chuck was cut into large cubes. The meat was browned in a Dutch oven with oil. Onions, carrots, celery, and garlic were added. Beef broth was poured in until everything was covered. The pot went into the oven at 275 degrees. It cooked for 4 hours, low and slow. The meat turned so tender you could cut it with a fork. The vegetables were soft and sweet. The broth thickened into gravy. While the stew cooked, potatoes were peeled and boiled. They were mashed with butter and milk until creamy. The stew was ladled into bowls. A big scoop of mashed potatoes went on top. Families ate this together on Saturday nights. The whole meal cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. The kitchen smelled amazing all afternoon. Then slow cookers were invented in the 1970s. Mothers could dump everything in and walk away. But it didn't taste the same. The meat wasn't browned at first. The vegetables were mushy. The heirloom method was abandoned. Nobody makes beef stew in the oven anymore. That technique is lost. Crispy chicken parmesan became an heirloom dinner in Italian-American homes during the 1950s. Grandmothers brought this recipe from Italy and adapted it for American kitchens. Chicken breasts were pounded thin with a meat mallet. Each piece was dredged in flour, then dipped in beaten eggs, then coated in breadcrumbs mixed with Parmesan cheese. The breaded chicken was fried in olive oil until golden brown and crispy. It was placed in a baking dish. Marinara sauce was spooned over each piece. Mozzarella cheese was layered on top. The dish went into the oven at 350 degrees for 20 minutes until the cheese melted and bubbled. The chicken stayed crispy underneath the sauce. Families served it with spaghetti on the side. The whole meal cost 90 cents and fed 6 people. This was a special Sunday dinner in Italian neighborhoods. Mothers made it for holidays and birthdays. Then in the 1990s, restaurants started selling chicken parmesan for $8 a plate. It became restaurant food instead of home food. Mothers stopped making it at home. Daughters never learned how to bread chicken properly. They never learned the trick of keeping it crispy under the sauce. The heirloom technique died. Today, people order it from Olive Garden instead. Baked spaghetti casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they needed to feed a crowd. This dish stretched 1 pound of ground beef to feed 12 people. Spaghetti was boiled and drained. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic. A jar of marinara sauce was stirred in. The cooked spaghetti was mixed with the meat sauce in a huge baking dish. 4 kinds of cheese were layered on top: mozzarella, cheddar, Parmesan, and ricotta. The whole thing was covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Then the foil came off for 10 more minutes. The cheese on top turned golden and bubbly. The edges got crispy. Families ate this at potlucks, church dinners, and family reunions. One pan fed 12 people for $3. Leftovers tasted even better the next day. Every mother knew how to make this. It was their go-to dish when company came over. Then in the 2000s, people started eating less pasta. Low-carb diets became popular. Spaghetti was considered unhealthy. Mothers stopped making casseroles. They served salads instead. The heirloom recipe disappeared. Young mothers today don't know how to make baked spaghetti. They think it's too heavy and old-fashioned. That generation is gone. Spanish rice with ground beef was the heirloom dinner mothers made every Tuesday night in the 1950s. This recipe came from Mexican-American grandmothers who lived in Texas and California. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions and minced garlic. The beef was crumbled into small pieces as it cooked. Bell peppers were chopped and added to the skillet. Green peppers or red peppers, whatever was cheap that week. Uncooked white rice was stirred into the beef mixture. The rice was toasted in the beef fat until it turned golden. Canned tomatoes and tomato sauce were poured in. Chicken broth was added. Paprika, cumin, and chili powder were sprinkled on top. Everything was stirred together. The skillet was covered with a lid. The heat was turned down to low. The rice simmered for 25 minutes until tender. The liquid was absorbed. The rice was fluffy and red from the tomatoes. Families ate this with tortillas or cornbread. The whole meal cost $1 and fed 8 people. Mexican-American families made this weekly for generations. Then, in the 1980s, instant Spanish rice appeared in stores. Uncle Ben's. Rice-A-Roni. It came in a box. Nobody wanted to spend 30 minutes making it from scratch. The heirloom recipe disappeared. 10 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one fed families for decades. Every single one cost less than $1. Grandmothers made them without recipes. They learned by watching their mothers cook. Then watching stopped. Teaching stopped. The dinners disappeared. Nobody wrote them down. 20 more heirloom dinners remain. Here they are. This recipe came from generations of Amish grandmothers who cooked for large families working the fields. A beef chuck roast was placed in a heavy pot with just enough water to cover it. Salt and pepper went in. The pot was covered and simmered on the stove for 4 hours. Low heat. Slow cooking. The beef became so tender it fell apart when you touched it with a fork. The cooking liquid turned into rich beef broth. While the beef cooked, thick egg noodles were made from scratch. Flour, eggs, and a pinch of salt rolled out flat and cut into wide strips. The noodles were dropped into the beef broth during the last 20 minutes of cooking. They absorbed all the beefy flavor. The beef was shredded by hand right in the pot. Butter was stirred in at the end. Everything was served in deep bowls. The noodles were slippery and rich. The beef was melt-in-your-mouth tender. Farming families ate this after long days in the fields. The whole meal cost $1 and fed 10 people. It stuck to your ribs and gave you energy. The heirloom recipe stayed on the farms. City families never learned it. That knowledge didn't leave the Amish communities. Crockpot hash brown casserole became an heirloom dinner in the 1980s when slow cookers were in every American kitchen. Mothers learned this recipe from church cookbooks and passed it to their daughters. Frozen hash browns were the base. A whole bag went into the crock pot. Cream of chicken soup was mixed with sour cream and melted butter. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in. The mixture was poured over the hash browns. Everything was stirred together. Salt, pepper, and garlic powder were sprinkled on top. The lid went on. The crock pot cooked on low for 6 hours. By dinner time, the hash browns were soft and creamy. The mothers made it for potlucks and family gatherings. It stayed warm in the crock pot all night. Everyone went back for seconds. Every church cookbook in America had a version of this recipe. Then in the 2010s, people started avoiding processed foods. Cream of chicken soup was considered unhealthy. Frozen hash browns were too processed. Young mothers stopped making this casserole. They made fresh vegetable dishes instead. Daughters never learned the recipe. They don't own slow cookers. They use Instant Pots now. But hash brown casserole doesn't work in an Instant Pot. The texture is wrong. Tuna patties were the heirloom dinner mothers made on Fridays when Catholics couldn't eat meat. Every Friday from the 1940s through the 1970s, families ate fish. Tuna was the cheapest option. 2 cans of tuna were drained and dumped into a bowl. Mothers mixed in 1 beaten egg, crushed saltine crackers, diced onion, and a squeeze of lemon juice. The mixture was formed into flat patties by hand. Each patty was pan-fried in oil until golden brown on both sides. They were crispy on the outside and soft inside. Served with tartar sauce and a slice of lemon. Coleslaw on the side. The whole meal cost 50 cents and fed a family of 6. Every Catholic family in America ate tuna patties on Fridays. Children grew up eating them every single week. Mothers knew exactly how many crackers to add to make the patties hold together. They knew exactly how hot the oil should be. They never measured anything. They just knew by feel. The recipe was forgotten within 1 generation. Daughters never learned how to make them because they were never required to. Today, young people don't even know tuna patties exist. They think tuna only comes in sandwiches. The heirloom dinner died when the church rules changed. Nobody makes it anymore, except a few old women who remember. Spaghetti and meatballs was the heirloom dinner every Italian grandmother made from scratch in the 1950s. This meal took all day to prepare. The meatballs were made first. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, grated Parmesan cheese, eggs, minced garlic, and fresh parsley. The mixture was rolled into golf ball-sized meatballs by hand. Each meatball was browned in olive oil until crusty on the outside. They were set aside. Then the sauce was made. Crushed tomatoes, tomato paste, garlic, basil, and oregano went into a big pot. The browned meatballs were dropped in. The sauce simmered on the stove for 4 hours. Low heat. Constant stirring. The meatballs soaked up the tomato flavor. The sauce thickened and turned deep red. While the sauce cooked, spaghetti was boiled in salted water. It was drained and tossed with butter. The meatballs and sauce were ladled over the spaghetti. Grated Parmesan cheese was sprinkled on top. Families ate this every Sunday after church. The whole meal cost $2 and fed 10 people. Mothers could open a jar instead of simmering sauce for 4 hours. It was faster, easier. They stopped making sauce from scratch. Daughters never learned the technique. They never learned how long to simmer it. Today, people heat up jarred sauce. It tastes nothing like Grandma's. Homemade lasagna was the heirloom dinner Italian grandmothers made for special occasions in the 1950s. This meal required hours of work. The meat sauce was made first. Ground beef and Italian sausage were browned together with onions and garlic. Crushed tomatoes, tomato paste, red wine, and Italian herbs were added. Lasagna noodles were boiled until barely tender. They were laid out on towels to cool. Then came the assembly. A thin layer of meat sauce went in the bottom of a deep baking dish. A layer of noodles went on top. A layer of ricotta filling was spread over the noodles. Shredded mozzarella cheese was sprinkled on. Another layer of meat sauce. The whole thing was covered with foil and baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour. Families ate this on Christmas, Easter, and birthdays. The whole pan cost $5 and fed 12 people. 15 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one took hours to make. Every single one required skills passed down through generations. Mothers taught daughters by showing them, not with written recipes. When teaching stopped, the skills died. The dinners died with them. 15 more remain. Here they are. Classic baked ziti was the heirloom dinner Italian-American mothers made when they needed to feed a crowd cheaply. Ground beef was browned with onions and garlic. Marinara sauce was stirred in. The drained pasta was mixed with the meat sauce in a huge bowl. Ricotta cheese was dolloped throughout. Everything was dumped into a baking dish. Shredded mozzarella cheese covered the top completely. The dish was baked uncovered at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. The cheese melted and turned golden brown. The edges got crispy. The middle stayed soft and cheesy. This meal was served at church potlucks, family reunions, and funeral dinners. Daughters never learned how to make it. They don't even know what ziti pasta is. They think all pasta is spaghetti. The heirloom dinner disappeared in one generation. Homemade hamburger helper was the heirloom dinner mothers made before the boxed version existed. Ground beef was browned in a large skillet with diced onions. Garlic powder, paprika, salt, and pepper were stirred in. Beef broth and milk were poured into the skillet. Elbow macaroni was added directly to the liquid. The skillet was covered. Everything simmered for 15 minutes until the macaroni was tender. The liquid was mostly absorbed. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in at the end. The cheese melted into a creamy sauce. The whole meal was made in one pan. It cost $1 and fed 6 people. Kids loved it. They ate seconds and thirds. Then, in 1971, General Mills invented boxed hamburger helper. Double-crust chicken pot pie was the heirloom dinner grandmothers made when they needed comfort food. This dish came from England and was cooked in America since the 1700s. A whole chicken was boiled until tender. The meat was shredded by hand. The chicken broth was saved. Butter was melted in a pot. Flour was whisked in to make a roux. The chicken broth was slowly added while whisking constantly. The mixture thickened into gravy. Diced carrots, peas, celery, and potatoes were stirred in. The shredded chicken went in. Everything simmered until the vegetables were tender. Meanwhile, pie crust was made from scratch. Flour, butter, salt, and ice water mixed into dough. The dough was rolled flat. Half the dough lined the bottom of a pie dish. The chicken and vegetable mixture was poured in. The other half of the dough covered the top. The edges were crimped shut. Slits were cut in the top to let steam escape. The pie was baked at 400 degrees for 45 minutes until the crust turned golden brown. The filling bubbled out through the slits. Families ate this on cold winter nights. The whole pie cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. Grandmothers made it from memory. They never measured the ingredients for the crust. They just knew by feel. Then frozen pot pies appeared in stores. Marie Callender's, Swanson. People bought them instead. Nobody wanted to spend 3 hours making a pie from scratch. The heirloom recipe died. Young people today don't know pot pie used to be homemade. Tuna noodle casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made on Fridays in Catholic homes. This recipe became popular in the 1950s when canned soup was invented. Egg noodles were boiled and drained. 2 cans of tuna were drained and flaked. Frozen peas were thawed. Everything was mixed together in a large bowl. 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup were stirred in. Milk was added to make it creamy. The mixture was poured into a baking dish. Crushed potato chips were sprinkled on top. The dish was baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The chips on top turned golden and crunchy. The inside stayed creamy and hot. Families ate this every Friday night. The whole casserole cost 75 cents and fed 6 people. Every Catholic mother in America knew how to make this. It was the easiest Friday dinner. No recipe needed. Just dump everything together and bake. Children grew up eating it every week. Some loved it, some hated it. But everyone ate it because it was Friday. Then in the 1970s, the Catholic Church changed the rules. Catholics didn't have to eat fish on Fridays anymore. Families stopped making tuna noodle casserole. They made hamburgers instead. The recipe disappeared within 1 generation. Young mothers today have never made it. They don't know what it is. They think tuna only goes in sandwiches. The heirloom dinner died when the church rules changed. A few old women still make it. But their daughters never learned. When those women die, the recipe dies with them. Crockpot chili was the heirloom dinner mothers made in the 1970s when slow cookers became popular. This recipe was passed down from mothers who made it on the stove in the 1950s. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions. It was drained and dumped into the crock pot. Canned kidney beans, canned diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, and tomato paste went in. Chili powder, cumin, garlic powder, and cayenne pepper were stirred in. Everything cooked on low for 8 hours. The flavors blended together. The chili thickened. By dinner time, the house smelled amazing. Families ate it with shredded cheddar cheese, sour cream, and saltine crackers. Cornbread on the side. The whole pot cost $3 and fed 10 people. Leftovers tasted even better the next day. Mothers made this every week during winter. It was cheap, filling, and easy. Kids ate bowls and bowls of it. Then in the 2000s, slow cookers went out of style. Instant pots replaced them. Everything cooked in 30 minutes instead of 8 hours. But chili needs time. The flavors need to develop slowly. Instant pot chili tastes thin and watery. The meat is tough. The beans are hard. Mothers stopped making slow cooker chili. They ordered takeout instead. Daughters never learned how to make chili in a crock pot. They don't own slow cookers. They think chili only comes from Wendy's or a can. The heirloom recipe is gone. Nobody has 8 hours to let chili simmer anymore. 20 heirloom dinners lost. Every single one fed families for generations. Every single one disappeared when shortcuts replaced cooking. Canned soup replaced homemade. Frozen dinners replaced fresh. Takeout replaced kitchens. Mothers stopped teaching. Daughters stopped learning. 10 more heirloom dinners remain. These are the last ones. Cheesy chicken noodle casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they had leftover chicken. This recipe came from grandmothers who never wasted anything. A whole chicken was roasted on Sunday for dinner. The chicken meat was shredded by hand and placed in a large bowl. Egg noodles were boiled until tender and drained. They were added to the bowl with the chicken. A can of cream of chicken soup was mixed with sour cream and milk. The mixture was poured over the chicken and noodles. Frozen peas and diced carrots were stirred in. Everything was mixed together until combined. Shredded cheddar cheese was folded in. The whole mixture was poured into a greased baking dish. More cheddar cheese was sprinkled on top. Crushed Ritz crackers were layered over the cheese. The dish was baked uncovered at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The cheese melted and bubbled. The crackers turned golden brown and crispy. The inside stayed creamy and hot. Families ate this with a side salad. Cocktail meatballs were the heirloom dinner mothers. Ground beef was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, minced onion, salt, and pepper. The mixture was rolled into tiny meatballs about the size of walnuts. Each meatball was browned in a skillet until crusty on all sides. They were placed in a slow cooker. The sauce was made next. Equal parts grape jelly and chili sauce were mixed together in a bowl. Cheeseburger pie was the heirloom dinner mothers made. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions. Worcestershire sauce, salt, and pepper were stirred in. The beef was drained and placed in the bottom of a pie dish. Shredded cheddar cheese was sprinkled over the meat. In a separate bowl, Biscuit baking mix was whisked with eggs and milk. The mixture turned into a thin batter. The whole thing was baked at 400 degrees for 30 minutes. The crust looked like a biscuit. The inside stayed moist with melted cheese and beef. When you cut into it, the layers were visible. Children loved it because it tasted like fast food but was homemade. It felt special. Every bite reminded you of McDonald's. Then, in the 1990s, people started eating healthier. Ground beef was considered unhealthy. Biscuit was processed. Cheese was full of fat. Health-conscious mothers stopped making cheeseburger pie. They made grilled chicken and vegetables instead. Daughters never learned the recipe. They grew up eating lean proteins and salads. They never tasted cheeseburger pie. Today, young mothers have never heard of it. They think it sounds disgusting. They can't imagine mixing a cheeseburger with pie crust, but it actually tastes amazing. The Biscuit forms a fluffy biscuit layer that soaks up the beef juices. The cheese melts into everything. It's comfort food at its best. The heirloom recipe died when people became obsessed with healthy eating. Nobody makes it anymore. Old women who remember it say their daughters missed out on something special. But their daughters don't believe them. They think grandma's food was gross. Ground beef and potato casserole was the heirloom dinner British grandmothers brought to America and passed down through generations. This meal was called shepherd's pie in England. In America, it became a casserole. Ground beef was browned in a skillet with diced onions and minced garlic. Worcestershire sauce, salt, pepper, and thyme were stirred in. Frozen mixed vegetables were added: peas, carrots, and corn. Beef broth was poured in. Everything simmered for 10 minutes until thick. The mixture was spread in the bottom of a deep baking dish. Meanwhile, potatoes were peeled, boiled, and mashed with butter and milk. The mashed potatoes were spread over the beef mixture like frosting on a cake. The top was smoothed flat with a spatula. Some mothers used a fork to make decorative ridges on top. The dish was baked at 375 degrees for 30 minutes. The potatoes on top turned golden brown. The edges got crispy. The beef underneath bubbled up through the sides. The whole house smelled like comfort. Families ate this on cold winter nights. One pan fed 8 people for $2. It was filling and satisfying. Children ate every bite because they loved mashed potatoes. Even picky eaters cleaned their plates. Grandmothers made this weekly during winter months. Their daughters watched and learned. They made it for their own families. Then in the 2000s, people stopped eating heavy casserole. They wanted lighter meals. Grilled fish and quinoa replaced beef and potatoes. Young mothers considered shepherd's pie too old-fashioned and fattening. They served Mediterranean food instead. Daughters never learned how to make it. They grew up eating trendy, healthy food. They never tasted the comfort of beef and mashed potatoes baked together. Ground beef casserole was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they needed to clean out the refrigerator. This dish had no specific recipe. Every family made it differently. The basic formula was ground beef plus vegetables plus starch plus cheese. Ground beef was browned in a skillet. Whatever vegetables were in the refrigerator got chopped and added. Onions, peppers, celery, carrots, zucchini, mushrooms. Anything worked. Whatever starch was in the pantry went in next. Egg noodles, rice, potatoes, or macaroni. A can of tomato soup or a cream of mushroom soup was stirred in for sauce. Everything was mixed together and dumped into a baking dish. Shredded cheese covered the top. The casserole was baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The result was different every time depending on what vegetables and starch were used. It always tasted good. The cheese melted and bubbled. The beef was savory. The vegetables were tender. Families ate it with bread to soak up the sauce. The whole casserole cost about $2 and fed 10 people. Mothers made this at least once a week. It was the ultimate leftover meal. Nothing went to waste. Whatever was about to go bad in the refrigerator went into the casserole. Children never complained because it was smothered in cheese. Everyone ate it happily. Grandmothers passed this technique down to their daughters. They didn't give them a written recipe. They just showed them how to throw things together, how to eyeball the proportions. R.E. Hook. 25 heirloom dinners lost forever. Every single one fed families for generations. Every single one disappeared when convenience replaced cooking. Shortcuts replaced skills. Recipes replaced instinct. Young mothers stopped watching their mothers cook. They stopped learning by doing. 5 more heirloom dinners remain. These are the final ones. Calico beans were the heirloom dinner mothers made for potlucks and church suppers in the Midwest. This dish came from farm families who needed to feed large crowds cheaply. Ground beef was browned in a large pot with diced onions. Bacon was cut into pieces and fried separately until crispy. The bacon was added to the beef. Then came the beans, 3 different kinds. Pork and beans from a can. Kidney beans drained and rinsed. Butter beans drained and rinsed. All 3 went into the pot with the beef and bacon. The sauce was made next. Ketchup, brown sugar, yellow mustard, and cider vinegar were mixed together. The sauce was poured over the beans. Everything was stirred together and simmered on low heat for 1 hour. The flavors blended. The sauce thickened. The beans absorbed the sweet and tangy taste. The dish was served hot in bowls with cornbread on the side. The whole pot cost $3 and fed 20 people. Every church potluck in Iowa, Ohio, and Indiana had calico beans. Every family reunion had them. Every funeral dinner had them. Mothers made them in huge quantities. They were the perfect crowd-pleasing dish. Everyone loved them. Children ate them even though they had beans. The bacon and brown sugar made them taste good. Grandmothers passed this recipe down to their daughters verbally. They never wrote it down. Every family had slight variations. Some used more brown sugar, some added coffee or molasses. But the basic formula was always the same. Ground beef, bacon, 3 kinds of beans, and sweet tangy sauce. Then in the 2000s, potlucks became less common. People stopped going to church. Families moved away from each other. There were no more large gatherings. Mothers stopped making calico beans. Beef and macaroni skillet was the heirloom dinner mothers made before hamburger helper existed. In the 1950s, this was called American goulash. It had nothing to do with Hungarian goulash. It was completely American. Ground beef was browned in a large cast-iron skillet with diced onions and minced garlic. Salt, pepper, and paprika were stirred in. A can of tomato sauce was poured in. A can of diced tomatoes went in next. Beef broth was added. Everything was stirred together and brought to a boil. Elbow macaroni was added directly to the skillet. Liquid barely covered the pasta. The skillet was covered with a lid. The heat was reduced to a simmer. The macaroni cooked for 15 minutes in the tomato and beef mixture. It absorbed all the flavors. The liquid was mostly absorbed by the time the pasta was tender. The dish was thick and saucy. Shredded cheddar cheese was stirred in at the end. The cheese melted into everything. The whole meal was made in 1 skillet, no separate pot for boiling pasta. It cost $1.50 and fed 8 people. Mothers made this at least twice a week. It was fast, easy, and filling. Children loved it. They ate huge portions. The dish stuck to your ribs. You stayed full for hours. Grandmothers taught their daughters how to make it. The key was not using too much liquid. If you added too much, the pasta would be soupy. You wanted it thick and saucy. That technique was learned by watching, not from a recipe. Then in 1971, hamburger helper was invented. It came in a box with dried pasta and powdered sauce. You just added ground beef and water. It was even easier than making it from scratch. Mothers started buying boxes instead. The homemade version was forgotten. Daughters never learned how to make it. They grew up eating the boxed version. They think that's how it's supposed to taste. They don't know the homemade version tastes better. Real tomatoes instead of powder. Real cheese instead of chemicals. The heirloom recipe died when the convenience version appeared. Hamburger soup was the heirloom dinner mothers made when they needed to stretch 1 pound of ground beef to feed 10 people during tight weeks. This soup came directly from Depression-era grandmothers who mastered the art of making a little bit of meat go a long way without anyone leaving the table hungry. Mothers browned ground beef in a large pot with diced onions and minced garlic over medium-high heat. They crumbled the beef into very small pieces as it cooked, breaking it apart with a wooden spoon. Each piece was no bigger than a pea, so the meat stretched further and distributed evenly throughout the soup. After the beef browned completely, they poured in 8 cups of beef broth. Canned diced tomatoes went in next, along with tomato sauce for thickness and richness. Then came the vegetables, whatever was cheap that week at the grocery store. Diced potatoes, sliced carrots, chopped celery, and frozen green beans all went into the pot. Everything simmered together, uncovered, for 1 full hour. The potatoes became fork tender. The carrots softened perfectly. The flavors blended into a rich, beefy soup that tasted like it had simmered all day. Some mothers added pearl barley or white rice to make the soup even heartier and more filling. Dried herbs like oregano, basil, and bay leaves were thrown in for flavor. Salt and black pepper were added to taste. The finished soup was ladled into bowls and served steaming hot with saltine crackers on the side. The whole pot cost $2 in ingredients and fed 12 people easily. It was incredibly filling and satisfying. 2 bowls and you were completely stuffed. Mothers made this soup every week during winter months. It was their go-to-cheap dinner when money was tight. Children ate it without complaining because the broth was flavorful, the vegetables were soft, and the beef added just enough meaty flavor without being overwhelming. Grandmothers passed this recipe down by showing their daughters how to make it in their own kitchens. They never measured anything with cups or spoons. They just knew instinctively how much of each ingredient to add by sight and experience. They knew by looking and smelling when the soup reached perfection. This knowledge came from making the soup hundreds of times over decades. Haystacks were the heirloom dinner families made at potlucks and youth group gatherings from the 1950s through the 1990s across America. This meal was not really a recipe with precise measurements. It was a format, a system where everyone built their own plate exactly how they wanted it. The base was always tortilla chips or crushed saltine crackers spread across your plate in a thick layer. Some families used white rice as the foundation instead. Then came the toppings piled on one by one. Ground beef seasoned with taco seasoning was always the first layer. The seasoned beef was browned in a large skillet and kept warm in a slow cooker. It was scooped generously over the chips or rice. Then you moved down the topping bar and added whatever you wanted from dozens of options. Shredded iceberg lettuce went on next, diced fresh tomatoes, shredded cheddar cheese, dollops of sour cream, salsa from a jar, sliced black olives from a can, diced white onions, refried beans warmed in a pot. Some families offered kidney beans, corn, jalapenos, or guacamole. Everyone made their plate completely different based on personal preferences. The toppings were piled high into a massive mound. That is why it was called a haystack, because it looked like a big pile of hay sitting on your plate. You ate it with a fork, cutting through all the layers at once. The chips got soggy quickly from the hot beef and wet toppings. Some people loved the soggy texture, others hated it and ate fast before everything turned mushy. But everyone ate it regardless because building your own plate was fun and exciting. The entire meal cost about $3 to feed 20 people, making it perfect for church potlucks and youth group dinners where budgets were tight. Everyone could customize their haystack exactly how they liked it. Picky eaters could skip toppings they hated. Adventurous eaters could pile everything on. It was interactive and engaging. Kids loved competing to see who could build the tallest haystack without it collapsing. They piled their plates absurdly high with cheese and sour cream. Mothers made haystacks for decades because it was incredibly easy. You just browned ground beef and set out bowls of toppings. No complicated cooking techniques required. Creamy chicken spaghetti bake was the heirloom dinner Italian-American grandmothers made when they had leftover chicken from Sunday roast. This dish was called chicken tetrazzini in fancy restaurants, but at home it was just chicken spaghetti, the meal that appeared every Monday night without fail. Grandmothers boiled spaghetti in salted water until tender and drained it in a colander. They melted butter in a large pot over medium heat. They whisked flour into the melted butter to create a roux, stirring constantly for 2 minutes until it smelled nutty. They slowly poured in chicken broth while whisking continuously so no lumps formed. They added heavy cream and kept whisking. The mixture thickened into a smooth, creamy sauce that coated the back of a spoon. They stirred in sliced mushrooms that had been sautéed until golden. They added minced garlic and black pepper. They folded in shredded cooked chicken torn into bite-sized pieces. The drained spaghetti went into the pot next. Everything was tossed together until every strand was coated in creamy sauce. Grated Parmesan cheese was folded in, melting slightly from the heat. The whole mixture was poured into a greased 13 by 9-inch baking dish. More Parmesan cheese was sprinkled generously across the top. Buttered breadcrumbs were scattered over the cheese for crunch. The dish baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the top turned golden brown and crispy, while the inside stayed creamy and bubbling. This dinner was served at special occasions, holidays, birthdays, and Sunday dinners after church. The whole dish cost $3 and fed 10 people. It felt fancy even though it was made from leftovers. The creamy sauce made it special. 30 heirloom dinners gone. Every single one fed families for generations. Every single one cost less than $2. Grandmothers made them without recipes. They learned by watching their mothers cook. They measured nothing. They timed nothing. They just knew. That knowledge came from making the same meals hundreds of times, from muscle memory, from instinct. Then everything changed. Daughters stopped watching. They got busy. They got jobs. They had no time to stand in the kitchen for hours. Convenience foods appeared in stores, frozen dinners, canned soups, boxed mixes, take-out restaurants. Cooking from scratch became old-fashioned. Teaching stopped. Learning stopped. Grandmothers died without passing anything down. The recipes died with them. Today, those dinners are completely gone. Your grandmother remembers every single one. She ate them every week growing up. She watched your mother make them, but she never taught you. You never asked. Now it's too late. The recipes are lost forever. If this made you feel something, smash that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who remembers these dinners. Comment below if your grandmother made any of these. Tag someone whose grandma was an amazing cook. These heirloom dinners are disappearing. This might be the last time anyone talks about them. Don't let them die without anyone noticing.